For decades, humanity had been the unspoken backbone of the galaxy, an emerging force that turned the tide of countless conflicts and disasters. Where other species saw only chaos, humanity saw opportunity, even in the darkest corners of space. From the wastelands of abandoned colonies to the war-torn frontiers, Earth's diplomats and scientists had always been there to offer peace, technology, and hope. Their medicines had cured plagues that had long ravaged the Andorian belt. Their engineers had restored vital trade routes when interstellar storms rendered them impassable. Their fleets had ended wars that had raged for centuries, not through force, but through negotiation and relentless diplomacy. The galaxy, once fractured and bleeding, began to heal under humanity's careful watch. Empires and coalitions that once viewed each other with distrust slowly built partnerships with Earth and its colonies. The delicate, fragile peace began to take shape, one that hung by a thread but held strong, until it didn't. As humanity's influence grew, so did their reputation. But the galaxy's older species, those who had once ruled without question, began to look at humanity with an uncomfortable sense of both admiration and disdain. The ancient Skeri, long the architects of galactic peace, began to murmur that humans were too young, too brash, too ambitious. Their methods were too unorthodox. Their innovations, though impressive, seemed disruptive. The truth was, humanity's rapid rise in power had begun to make the established powers uneasy. The once untouchable races began to notice something troubling. Their own centuries-old systems of control were starting to show cracks. Where the Skeri had held sway over the galaxy through force and diplomacy alike, humanity had built something far more effective, an interconnected web of shared resources, knowledge, and influence that spread across colonies, worlds, and networks like nothing they had ever seen. They had managed to bring together species that had been enemies for millennia, all under the banner of a single cause: mutual survival. The Galactic Assembly, once a place of calm order, began to fray at the edges. Yet the peace persisted, more out of convenience than genuine friendship. No one dared to upset the delicate balance. The galaxy was content, or at least they seemed to be. But deep in the hidden chambers of the Assembly's oldest halls, whispers started to circulate. Whispers about humanity's increasing influence, about how Earth's contributions, so vital to the galaxy's stability, could easily be replaced. The galaxy's older, more powerful factions began to wonder, had they overestimated humanity's worth? For the first time, the leaders of Earth, who had once been revered as the architects of galactic harmony, began to sense something dark stirring in the shadows of interstellar politics. No one spoke it aloud, but humanity's role in the galaxy was slowly being forgotten. It wasn't long before the cracks widened. Humanity's ability to inspire peace, to stabilize the galaxy, was about to be tested in ways they never anticipated. As the Assembly continued to debate quietly in its great halls, the humans, quiet, patient, and always observant, watched. And in the silence that followed, they saw something they hadn't expected. The galaxy was forgetting its own debt to humanity. The fragile peace that had been painstakingly built over decades was about to come crashing down. The galaxy's slow drift toward betrayal didn't come with the dramatic flare of warships or the roar of weapons. It began in the quiet, private halls of the Galactic Assembly, an organization that, once founded by the most powerful and enlightened species, now seemed more like a monument to outdated power structures. Humanity had always been a steady presence at the table, a bridge between distant worlds, a negotiator when crises arose. But as Earth's influence grew, so did the resentment from the older, more established races. They began to whisper in dark corners, away from the watchful eyes of the public. Humanity had done enough, they said. The young species was becoming a threat, one that couldn't be controlled. The Skeri, the oldest of the galaxy's superpowers, held the most sway in these discussions. For centuries, they had maintained order with an iron grip, ruling over lesser species with an air of superiority. And yet, in their eyes, humanity's rise had been too swift, too unyielding. There was something unsettling about a species that could reshape galactic economies with a single decision, that could broker peace among enemies with nothing more than words. The Zkari had long considered themselves the galaxy's peacekeepers, but they could no longer deny that humanity was far better at it than they were. Quiet meetings were held, deals struck behind closed doors. Alliances began to form among those who saw humanity not as a protector, but as a rising power that threatened their status. The Velark, a fierce and proud species from the Outer Rim, were the first to publicly accuse humanity of sabotage. An accusation without merit, but one that resonated in a galaxy already primed to believe the worst. Their fleets had reported incidents involving human shipping routes, but no evidence was ever presented to support these claims. The Assembly, in its infinite desire to maintain stability, took sides. The Zkari's influence was enough to sway the decision. Humanity was declared guilty in the court of public opinion, though no trial had ever been conducted. Sanctions were imposed on Earth and its colonies. Trade routes were shut down, and human vessels were forced to dock in remote systems while their goods were confiscated. It was a calculated move, one that would weaken humanity's position without ever drawing the ire of the wider galaxy. For the first time, Earth's leaders were not greeted with respect at the Assembly. Instead, they were met with cold silence. Where once they had been trusted allies, now they were viewed with suspicion. Humanity, it seemed, was no longer welcome in the grand halls of the galaxy. The leaders of Earth, stunned but resolute, returned home to find their once united planet splintering. The colonies, too, began to feel the pressure. Trade stagnated. The once thriving interstellar economy began to wane as humanity's inventions and resources were stripped away. It wasn't just a matter of politics anymore. It was survival. For the first time, humanity found itself in a fight not against an army or an enemy, but against the system itself. The galaxy had betrayed them, and in that moment, Earth's leaders made a quiet decision. They would not beg for acceptance. They would not play by the Assembly's rules anymore. If the galaxy wanted to forget humanity, humanity would simply walk away. The silence that followed humanity's dismissal from the Galactic Assembly was deafening. In the grand halls of Earth's government, a decision of monumental consequence was being forged, one that would ripple through the fabric of the galaxy and change the course of history forever. The Council convened under an atmosphere of quiet determination, the weight of the moment hanging heavily over them. Leaders from Earth's nations, from the outer colonies to the core systems, gathered together in the now closed chambers. They were not there to beg for mercy or seek a way back into the Assembly's fold. There was no debate over the specifics of the sanctions, nor was there any attempt to appeal to the Assembly's logic. The decision had already been made in their hearts, if not yet in their words. Should we remain? President Erica Lorne asked, her voice steady, but laden with an emotion that all present shared. Should we continue to fight for a place in a system that has no use for us anymore? Or should we do what we've always done when the odds are against us? Walk away. Her words settled over the room like a heavy fog. The question was simple, but the answer was anything but. For decades, humanity had invested everything into the idea of galactic unity. Their ships had carried peace to the furthest reaches of known space. They had given up so much, sacrificed so much, for the belief that the galaxy could be something greater than the sum of its parts. But now they stood at a crossroads. The same assembly that had once depended on them was the one that had thrown them aside without a second thought. Lorne's voice broke the silence again. The galaxy has turned its back on us. We don't need their acceptance. We never did. We've built something here, something greater than their politics and their power plays. And if we're truly wanted, we'll build something new, something of our own. There was no applause, no cheering. Instead, there was an understanding, an unspoken agreement between every leader present. They knew what had to be done. The decision was made not in anger, nor in resentment, but in quiet, undeniable truth. Humanity was no longer going to waste their time, their talent, or their resources trying to appease a system that saw them as expendable. Earth, with all its colonies and outposts, would leave the assembly behind. They would no longer be shackled by the delicate peace they had built with their own sweat and blood. If the galaxy was to fall into chaos, humanity would not be the one to fix it. They would simply walk away. A plan was set in motion, one that would take humanity's influence out of the assembly's grasp forever. They would shut down their communications relays, cut off their trade routes, and most importantly, sever their ties to the galactic economy. But they wouldn't just withdraw. No, humanity had never been one to simply vanish. They would leave a legacy, a signal to the galaxy that their contributions were no longer for sale. "Let's show them," said General Kellen Morse, commander of humanity's military fleet, his voice low and filled with resolve. "Let's remind the galaxy that they need us more than they know." And so, with that final vote, Earth's decision was sealed. Humanity would not beg. Humanity would not fight. Humanity would walk away and let the galaxy figure out what to do without them. The decision was made. Humanity would no longer wait for permission. Their withdrawal began with the quiet hum of technology powering down, one system at a time, until the silence became deafening. In the span of hours, the galaxy began to realize the true cost of their actions. Humanity's engineers, who had once tirelessly maintained the infrastructure of intergalactic trade, shut down their systems with an almost eerie precision. Communications relays, which linked every corner of the galaxy, flickered and then blinked out. The once bustling trade routes, which Earth had helped build and maintain, ground to a halt as all human vessels withdrew, one after another, leaving empty voids in space. Across the galaxy, ships and stations that had once depended on humanity's technology struggled to stay operational. Starports in the Outer Rim, which had thrived thanks to human-designed equipment, were left powerless. Without human-made energy cores, their systems began to fail. The sheer scale of the shutdown was mind-boggling. Millions of worlds, from the core systems to the fringes, suddenly found themselves cut off from critical resources, advanced medicine, and technologies they had come to rely on. The trade hubs, those sprawling centers of commerce that stretched across star systems, were now nothing more than empty husks. The markets once filled with humanity's patented goods, agriculture, technology, rare minerals, were now barren. Ships that had docked for routine resupply found themselves stuck, unable to leave because they lacked the human engineers to fix their navigational systems. And the silence was crushing. The once vibrant communication channels between planets were now filled only with static. Diplomats who had spent years building relationships with alien species could no longer make contact with their counterparts. The central hub of the Galactic Assembly, once bustling with the voices of 1,000 different species, was now eerily still. The leaders of the Assembly, who had once prided themselves on maintaining the peace, found themselves stranded in the quiet void, unsure of how to move forward. The first signs of real panic were subtle. Small distant colonies began to experience shortages. Food, medicine, and energy all began to run low. These were worlds that had once depended on human-run supply chains to stay afloat. Now, with no way to replace or repair their systems, they began to falter. A once stable galaxy was starting to show the first cracks in its foundation, and it was clear that humanity's departure was more than just a political statement. It was a rupture, a wound in the heart of galactic civilization. In the core systems, wealthier planets found themselves scrambling to find replacements for the human technology they had grown so accustomed to. The Zkari, proud and ancient as they were, quickly saw the scale of the collapse, but there was no immediate solution. Their own technological infrastructure, though advanced, was not designed to support the vast needs of the galaxy's many worlds in the same way that humanity had. While the Assembly debated and scrambled to respond, Earth's leaders did not turn back. They had made their decision, and now the galaxy would see what it was like without humanity's guiding hand. Humanity had walked away, and for the first time in centuries, the galaxy realized just how much of their peace had been built on human effort. The void left by their departure was felt everywhere, silent, oppressive, and impossible to ignore. At first, the galaxy's response to humanity's withdrawal was one of confusion, followed by disbelief. The assembly, though fractured, still held a sense of arrogance. After all, they had survived countless challenges before. Surely they could handle a mere withdrawal from one species, no matter how advanced. But as days turned into weeks, the stark reality of humanity's absence began to set in, and panic slowly crept through the galaxy's heart. The Outer Rim colonies were the first to feel the effects. With no human ships to provide trade or transport, their once thriving markets began to sputter. Food production began to drop. Medical supplies ran low, and the diseases humanity had eradicated began to resurface. What had been once considered a golden age of prosperity began to feel like a house of cards, precarious and ready to collapse at the slightest provocation. Rumors began to spread among the various species. The human withdrawal wasn't a simple protest. It was something much more severe. Some feared it was a warning. Others, more bluntly, saw it as a curse. The Zikari, with their vast empire and ancient wisdom, had long prided themselves on being the galactic peacekeepers. They had held the galaxy together for centuries, enforcing their order across the stars. But now, even they were beginning to see the cracks in their control. The older species, who had long dominated, were left without the intricate systems humanity had woven into the fabric of galactic life. The central hub of intergalactic communication, built and maintained by humanity's engineers, now flickered like a dying star. The leaders of the galaxy scrambled to send messages, desperate for contact with Earth, but found only silence. There were no more human diplomats to mediate disputes or offer technological solutions. The Zikari's once unquestioned rule now seemed hollow, and with no way to track or respond to growing tensions, their influence began to wane. Yet, even as the panic spread, many in the assembly held on to their arrogance. They didn't want to admit it. Humanity's departure was tearing apart the very fabric of the galaxy. The idea that humanity had quietly walked away from a system they had helped build was too difficult to accept. They refused to believe that the galaxy, for all its age and grandeur, was utterly dependent on the contributions of a single young species. But as the weeks dragged on, and supplies dwindled further, the realization began to settle in. Humanity had not just left. They had taken everything with them. Their innovations, their technology, their resources, they had all vanished, leaving only an emptiness that couldn't be filled by treaties or diplomacy. The assembly could talk, they could beg, but there was nothing they could do to reverse the damage. Humanity had left because it had been pushed away, and now the galaxy was paying the price. As systems began to fail in ways they never thought possible, the assembly convened for emergency meetings, but it was clear that their time was running out. The once unified front of the galaxy's superpowers was crumbling under the weight of their own hubris. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and now it was too late to turn back. As the galaxy floundered, struggling to cope with the loss of humanity's contributions, Earth and its colonies embarked on a quiet but deliberate renaissance. Far beyond the troubled borders of the assembly's reach, humanity began to reclaim its autonomy, building something entirely new, something that would not bend to the whims of the galaxy's failed institutions. The vast expanse of human space, once isolated and separate, now flourished. No longer bound by treaties or agreements, humanity's colonies grew into self-sustaining hubs, thriving on their own terms. These worlds, once seen as the fringes of civilization, were now centers of innovation, their citizens no longer bound by the political instability that had plagued the central galaxy. Technologies that humanity had once shared freely with the galaxy were now turned inward, fueling an age of unprecedented advancement. With no external interference, Earth's scientists and engineers unlocked new frontiers. Genetic enhancements, advanced propulsion systems, and self-repairing nanotechnology became common in human colonies. These innovations, once the envy of the galaxy, were now reserved only for humanity's use. The Central Worlds, with their advanced manufacturing systems, now churned out designs that could only be imagined by their former partners. They began to build ships that were faster, more efficient, and more powerful than anything the galaxy had seen before. Humanity's new fleet was not only a symbol of their self-sufficiency, but also a message to the stars, a reminder that they were not just the caretakers of peace, but also the masters of their own destiny. Humanity was no longer constrained by the limits of the Assembly or its hollow diplomacy. They had learned the hard way that peace with the galaxy was fragile, a fleeting thing built on shifting alliances, so they set about creating their own system, one based on mutual respect, innovation, and shared survival. It was a system built not on old political alliances, but on what humanity did best, forging their own path. And yet, even as humanity embraced this newfound freedom, they did not forget the lessons of the past. Their withdrawal from the galaxy was not a declaration of war, but a declaration of independence. There was no desire for conquest or revenge, only a quiet resolve to thrive without the interference of those who had once relied on them. Humanity had learned that their strength did not lie in bending to the will of others, but in the quiet persistence of their own values. The core of human space expanded, and with it, their influence grew. Word began to spread through the void. The once turbulent systems of the Outer Rim, the worlds forgotten by the galactic powers, now sought to ally with humanity, not out of desperation but out of admiration. They, too, wanted a life free from the suffocating bureaucracy of the Assembly. In a galaxy once dominated by the will of the old powers, humanity was now the beacon of possibility. Though the galaxy could no longer reach them, humanity's message rang clear across the stars. They did not need the galaxy, and they did not need permission. Humanity would carve its own place in the universe, one where they controlled their own fate. As the months passed, the gap between humanity and the galaxy's old powers continued to widen. The once vibrant and powerful Galactic Assembly was a shadow of its former self, fractured and struggling to maintain any semblance of order. The realization had begun to set in. The galaxy could not survive without humanity's contributions. What had once been seen as a bold statement, a mere withdrawal, had now evolved into a critical blow. The balance of power that had existed for millennia was slipping away. Desperate, the Assembly's leaders scrambled to find any solution, but their efforts were in vain. The Zikari, once the undisputed rulers of the galaxy, now faced challenges they had never anticipated. Their fleets, grand and imposing, were designed for conquest, but not for stability. The galaxy had been kept together by delicate webs of trade, diplomacy, and technology, none of which the Zikari had the capacity to replace. They realized too late that humanity had been the glue holding everything together, and now that it had vanished, the galaxy was beginning to unravel. In an act of last-ditch desperation, the Assembly called for a summit. Leaders from every corner of the galaxy were invited, from the Velark, who had initially accused humanity of sabotage, to the Helxians, an ancient race known for their technological prowess. The goal was clear: bring humanity back into the fold. It was not just a matter of political expedience anymore. The survival of the galaxy itself was at stake. But Earth was resolute. President Erika Lorne, who had once brokered peace between warring species, now stood firm in her decision. We have been forgotten, ignored, and cast aside by the very system we helped create, she stated in a public address. Humanity will not return to the table. We will not be pawns in your games anymore. The galaxy must learn to stand on its own without us. Yet the plea from the Assembly wasn't just about diplomacy. It was about survival. The galaxy's infrastructure, once maintained by human ingenuity, was beginning to collapse. The critical trade routes were now blocked by failing stations. The once dependable supply lines that carried food, medicine, and resources were no longer functional. The galaxy was crumbling under the weight of its own arrogance, and in the final hours, they were forced to acknowledge something they had refused to believe. Humanity had been right all along. As the final day of the summit arrived, the galaxy's leaders arrived at Earth's doorstep, their ships landing in the new capital of human space. The air was thick with tension. There was no negotiation, no grand speech, only a simple message: help us or everything collapses. But humanity was not swayed. The message had been sent. The galaxy had taken humanity's contributions for granted, and now they had to face the consequences of that neglect. Earth's leaders remained silent, resolute in their decision. There would be no return to the old ways. The galaxy was in chaos, and humanity had already moved on, having long since learned that their strength lay not in their ability to appease others, but in their ability to walk away when necessary. The Assembly's desperate plea would fall on deaf ears. It was too late. The balance of power had shifted, and the galaxy would have to find a new way to survive. The summit had failed. The final plea from the Assembly's leaders had been met with silence, and no one in the galaxy had expected that silence to speak so loudly. As the delegation of galactic leaders left Earth's capital, their faces were etched with defeat. They had come seeking salvation, but humanity had already decided its path. The message was clear. The galaxy was no longer their responsibility. Back in the heart of human space, President Erica Lorne stood before a crowd of thousands. The people of Earth and the colonies gathered, their eyes fixed on her as the weight of the galaxy's turmoil pressed upon them. There was no need for dramatic speeches or grand promises. They had already taken the necessary steps to secure their future. Now, all that remained was to look forward and embrace what had been forged in the silence of their departure. "We did not walk away out of spite," Lorne began, her voice steady and firm. "We walked away because we believed in something more than the politics of the old galaxy. We believed in our future. And now, it's time for us to shape that future, not just for ourselves, but for every world that wishes to stand beside us, in freedom and self-determination." Humanity's withdrawal from the galaxy wasn't an end. It was a beginning. Their colonies, now fully independent, thrived as autonomous worlds, free from the interference of the galactic powers that had once tried to control them. Each colony, from the icy moons of the outer rim to the lush planets of the inner systems, had been equipped with humanity's best innovations, allowing them to flourish without reliance on the failing systems of the old assembly. No longer constrained by the old treaties and the constant back and forth of political negotiations, these new human worlds developed their own identities, their own governments, and their own futures. For the first time in centuries, there was true peace. Not the peace of imposed order by a galactic government, but the peace that came from self-sufficiency. The people of the galaxy, once dependent on human resources and technology, now watched as humanity's worlds grew stronger with each passing day. The outer rim colonies, which had long been neglected, found new hope in the absence of the old powers. They rallied to humanity's side, eager to join in the creation of something new. Something that respected each species' sovereignty, a federation built on the idea of mutual respect and shared purpose. As the years went on, the old galactic powers, once united in their arrogance, continued to struggle with the void left by humanity's departure. The Zkeri, whose empire had been built on dominance, were left scrambling to maintain control. The Velark, whose accusation of sabotage had once threatened humanity, were now fighting among themselves for what remained of their political influence. The galaxy was unraveling, not because humanity had declared war, but because humanity had chosen to simply walk away. And as the once mighty powers of the galaxy faltered, humanity quietly built its new empire, not through war or conquest, but through innovation, resilience, and the strength of their conviction. They had shown the galaxy that true power wasn't just in military might or political maneuvering. It was in the quiet confidence to stand alone, to choose self-determination, and to walk away when the price of staying was too high. The galaxy would never be the same, and humanity had set a new precedent. The future was theirs to create, without the interference of those who thought they could control it.